Well, hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of the Church Leadership Lab, where we get to have conversations that help empower healthy churches. My name is Scott, and I get to host this podcast alongside your other host, Casey. Hello, Casey. How are you?
I'm good, Scott. How are you?
I'm doing excellent, dealing with ice and all the fun things that winter has to offer. So if anyone listens to this episode at a later date and it's like mid-July, just know that we were dreaming of this moment while we recorded this podcast.
If you hear the whirring in the background, that is the space heater that is defrosting my toes at the real moment. So I'm not apologizing for it. It's freezing.
It is, yeah. But
absolutely unrelated question for you, Scott, that I've never asked you. Are you a football fan?
I am, yes.
Being from Chicago, like how does that? Because again, I'm not supposed to do this, but it's like just before the Super Bowl.
Yeah.
And as a mom of a 13-year-old daughter who loves Taylor Swift, we are of course currently obsessed with the Chiefs for no good reason.
Sure.
And it made me think, like, how are you feeling? Are you okay?
Are you okay? What a loaded question to ask, like a Bears fan. Are you okay?
Well, y'all
you know what I mean?
Y'all have a complicated past with pro sports. I just wanted to check in on you.
We do. I appreciate it. I'm okay. Yeah, you learn to live with it, and count it joy when you suffer many trials. So just. I'm pushing through myself, but no, my 11-year-old daughter loves watching football too. Now she loves football, but like the Taylor Swift thing has been like
next level.
An added. Yeah. She's like enjoying the game. And then she's like, Dad, there's Taylor Swift also. So
it's a whole, it just has, tapped into an entire new demographic of young girl football viewers, which I love.
I know.
We're a football family. And I'm like, yeah, you love football. Like, you just love Taylor Swift. It's fine.
And I tend to get, maybe I'm just getting a little cynical, but I'm just like, did her marketing people and Travis Kelce's marketing people be like, it would be, it would be really good for both of us. It's just a giant PR stunt. And I don't want to believe that, but it would make so much sense. It would. We won't know, but that's okay. We have more fruitful things to get to, and really excited for today's conversation with Stephen Mulder. Stephen is a founding partner at Missional Labs, which he's going to unpack a little bit of all that they do. Previously served as the executive director at Bridgetown Church, the associate national director at Alpha Canada, and gave leadership to a church plant in downtown Vancouver. He has a master's of theology from Regent College, worked in Dubai in corporate consulting, and is originally from South Africa. He's passionate about leadership, the local church, and entrepreneurship, which we are going to talk all about in this conversation. He lives in Vancouver with his wife, Amy, and 2 daughters. Stephen, welcome to the show.
Thanks, guys. Great to be here. Thanks for having me.
Really glad to have you. Really excited for our conversation. Now, we just read kind of the public bio, the one you'd find out there. But I know sometimes there's things that don't make the public bio that all your friends and family would know about you. So if you're up for it, what would one of those things be?
Yeah, I think the me that I guess the behind the scenes people get to know is that I love adventure and I love saying yes to a good time with people. I love the outdoors. So, if you could find me doing anything in my spare time, it's been in the mountains or on the ocean or by the beach or in a forest or something. So, that's part of me, and which makes living in Vancouver a pretty epic place to live because it's a big outdoor playground.
I was going to say, I feel like, especially as you talked about mountains, ocean, I was like, Vancouver sounds like a perfect spot for you then to get all of that when you want it.
Yeah, no, it's great. It's a wonderful place.
I love that. Well, we're gonna go ahead, Casey. We're gonna jump in, and
I have no mountains. I've got no beach. I can't relate to that statement at all. I'm just a little bit jealous. So it's good.
Well, the funny thing is, you guys are just mentioning the weather, and you guys seem to be freezing, and it's kind of warm again in Vancouver. Like the big the Arctic outflow hit us. We froze, came and gone. All the snow's gone already, and so it's one of the joys of Vancouver. It's not as cold as the rest of Canada. Which makes it fun.
Well, before I get even more jealous, I'm just going to change the subject completely. Missional Labs. that is kind of where you are right now. I want to know everything about it because truthfully, I know nothing. So I want to know, what is the history of Missional Labs and really the work that you guys are doing? Can you just go straight into that?
Yeah, awesome. So Missional Labs was founded by myself and my co-founder, Tyler Preeb, who lives in New York, in 2021. And really, we got chatting in the midst of the pandemic, sort of mid-2020. And we were both serving in our respective roles. He was at Church of the City and I was at Bridgetown Church. And as many of us experienced in the pandemic moment, there really was this moment where this felt sense of the road before us was unknown. So much was changing. A lot of the leadership that was in place was just like, how do we lead through this moment? How long is this going to last? What's the future going to look like? And there was this real moment of change. And I think everyone felt the sense that the world was changing more rapidly than we could keep up with. And it was only going to increasingly accelerate. And it was really in that moment that we had the sense of like, how do we think about equipping the future of the church? What is the future of the church going to look like? And I remember in the middle of the pandemic where it felt like the most creative action that Christians were doing were figuring out how to do church on Zoom. And I was like, if we've reduced the gospel to like just listening to teaching content on Zoom, then that's kind of a sad reality. And I know there were complexities in that, and I'm a relatively global person. My family lives over the world. I'm married to somebody from a different country. So, you sort of experience the global pandemic in all its different facets of being in different countries and having different, regulations and all the rest of it. But I think the deeper question was like, how are we going to respond and adapt to change? And in my heart, like, I guess the last 10 years, I've been really passionate about the church and the gospel and evangelism and helping the church to reimagine what that could look like. And that was really what I felt my assignment was when I was working at Alpha Canada, was like, how do we actually help the church reimagine evangelism? The church is declining. How do we talk about our faith? And there are different complexities. And Vancouver, the city I live, is, one of the most secular cities in North America. And so the realities of like, how do you share your faith are in helpful ways are real. And as the rest of sort of the North America secularizes and becomes more increasingly post-Christian, what does it look like to engage people well? So just going back to kind of how Missional Labs began, we really just saw the need to help the church and navigate the future moment. And we recognized that there was no meaningful way or no like biblical way to really think about innovation and, and starting new things. And the concept that, some people may be familiar with is really taken from sort of the design industry around the concept of like design thinking. And that was made well known by IDEO or Google in their design sprints. But essentially design thinking is a problem solving methodology that's about iterating your way towards the future, building prototypes, failing quickly. And and I think like the church so often is like such a slow mover for these things. And I'm going to unpack some of the realities of like what, why that is and why I think that is. But essentially we wanted to help the church engage in this conversation about like, how do we see the gospel advance into the future when we are living in a very different time, even kind of pre-pandemic to post-pandemic, when the world is changing so much. So how do we equip people to make disciples, to evangelize, to think differently about church plants? And essentially, we just started doing innovation consulting and coming alongside existing organizations to help them navigate this moment. And what we really realized pretty quickly is that was fine. But then as we looked sort of throughout history, we recognized that when the church is in decline, often renewal comes from the edges, from the innovators, from the pioneers. And we recognize that, it's all very well to like help existing organizations kind of innovate towards the future. But kind of we had this like gut level core conviction that we thought that the people who were going to pave the way for the future are actually going to be an emerging group of leaders, of pioneers who understood the realities of this moment. And so we just started looking around our networks and coming across across people doing some really exciting, meaningful, innovative ways of, of discipleship or evangelism or engaging in technology, leadership, thinking differently about church planting. And we thought, what would it look like to bring these people together and in sort of a cohort format and help them think more meaningfully about what they're building. And at the end of the day is that a lot of, when you look at a lot of other sectors, they actually have ecosystems for innovation. They give resources to help startups kind of flourish. And essentially, the way that we were looking at things is like, there is nobody who's meaningfully really thinking about how to help, ministry startups. It's the Wild West out there. Everybody's competing for resources. It's often the ministries that are well-networked, well-resourced, and well-funded are the ones that actually make it. Yeah. But how many ideas are left on the table, because there is no place or meaningful community for them to get resource, to engage in the right networks and all the rest of it. So we wanted to create the ecosystem for innovation that could really help new projects, new pioneers, advance the gospel in like the way of Jesus in the 21st century. So that's kind of how we started. And
absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. I love that. I think one of the things that is really interesting that I agree with is sort of the people on the edges, the pioneers, the innovators, really fueling revival, really fueling, the church moving forward. The church has always grown, evolved as culture changes. Like the mission stays the same, but obviously methods change. And so given that you work with so many people kind of on the edge, pushing things forward, what shifts do you kind of see on the horizon? What are things you are seeing for the church to continue to fulfill the mission, even as kind of culture, changes and evolves?
Yeah, well, I think, there are a lot of young people, and particularly those, depending on what sort of like denominational tribe you have, I think you might use different language, but those who have that sort of like pioneering apostolic gift, often like the entrepreneurial kind of archetype, they have they often don't know where they actually fit in terms of the church context. They've always had this interesting relationship with the church. And, I think historically, a lot of these people would have like gone to work in a church or, maybe gone to work in a missions organization or, in a parachurch ministry, etc., a nonprofit. And I really think like what I see shifting is that not only is that becoming increasingly, difficult to do because of the challenges in pastoral ministry and, maybe some of the economics of things or the way the charitable sector is. But I really think people are looking for like meaningful new vocational pathways to live out what God's called them to do. And so I think sort of some of the traditional ways in which that's happening are not being followed as much, and people are starting their own things, starting a side hustle here, and doing the things that they feel called in their heart to do, but maybe don't have a way to like meaningfully do that full time. And so I think that there's this whole new generation where entrepreneurship in our day and age it's easier than ever to start things at the moment. There's so many great resources out there. But a lot of those resources are kind of wide for like the secular context, and they definitely are more and more in terms of the ministry space and things, and the nonprofit space for sure. But we really live in this age of opportunity. So I think people are going to continue to explore these things. I sort of see a movement of, just a movement of people trying and starting new things in a different way. Yeah. And we need to resource that.
Yeah. Yeah. It seems like for a while it was, if you had a kind of an entrepreneurial bent wired that way, it was like, go plant a church. It was sort of like, hey, that's starting something, go plant a church, which is great. And I mean, the Lord's used that in many, but sometimes I wonder if there's a little more focus around start, but know that you're going to start and then hand it off. Like kind of embrace that spirit of most entrepreneurs start and then move to something, build it and then grow and move to something. Or even just the freedom and the example of maybe it's not starting a church per se. Maybe there's a different way in which you can fulfill the mission and be a part of the kingdom and embrace those gifts, as you start and build something. I think my guess is you're giving a lot of people some imagination around what that can look like.
Yeah, I think, one way to think about it is that a lot of the entrepreneurial energy over the last number of decades has actually gone to church planting, because that's great. That's a missional structure, and we see that throughout church history that is, but I think if you think about it, it's anybody who's slightly entrepreneurial who has some of that gift, and they're like, oh, I've got to go plant a church. And that's really great, but there are tons of other ways in which the gospel can flow down. There are tons of other creative ways in which we can engage the world. And so I think, we sort of term those as missional ventures. And this idea that, you're starting things with a clear missional goal and an intent around these different categories. And I think there are a lot of big challenges that the church is facing. And at the end of the day, it's really cool to see how God calls specific people to tackle specific challenges. Yeah. I might not be skilled at a particular thing, or it's interesting when you look at some of the technology ventures that are happening at the moment. The people who are just so wired and who love that sort of thing, whereas other people are starting urban missions ministries in innovative ways to work with houseless people or whatever it is, and they have that unique gifting and skill for and I love that about the body of the church, and we have to see that that we're not sort of competing with each other, but that God has created ways to kind of resource it all in his kingdom.
Well, you haven't used this exact word, and I don't want to assume or project this, but what it sounds like to me are our spiritual giftings, right? We all have, and they're so unique, but that entrepreneurial spirit kind of overlaps a handful that could mistakenly well, you need to go plant a church, when it's no, you actually need to use your technology abilities, your ability to fail fast. I think fail fast and side hustle are two, I guess it's two words, but things that have been added to the dictionary. It's those are the things of 20-ish, whatever years we're going into. So not making the mistake of going, because I have this type of spirit, being a church planter is the only, and I don't mean that in a negative way, but that's the only logical next step for me. And it absolutely may not be. You talked about the freedom to have creative permission. It is absolutely okay to be hey, I don't have any desire to be a church planter, but I absolutely want to use these gifts in an entrepreneurial way to support church planters. That's a really important thing, permission to go, that's not for me, but this other thing is. So
then I think when you think about side hustles and startups, if you're doing it as a side hustle, there's sort of less, it's well, I don't mind doing a side hustle because if it fails, then that's not such a big deal. Yeah. But on the other hand is, we're not really meaningful helping to create an environment where that is common practice. When it comes to ministry, we always want to be super conservative when it comes to resources and things like that. And innovation, implicit within innovation is actually risk taking. Yeah. And so the way that we kind of looking at things and the way that we are trying to equip missional ventures is when you look at the missionary endeavor throughout history, right from Paul planting churches to our modern day moment, it's what are the things that are required? Risk taking, courage, sacrifice. What are those core convictions? What is the DNA of somebody who would have got on a boat to take the gospel to an unreached people group? In the 17th, 18th century, what does that look like in our time, in our digital world, in our global world? What does that courage, risk-taking, sacrifice look like? So we just wanted to sort of reinterpret that, and yes, activate that gift in numerous ways. And I think people don't have a clear sense that there is actually that there is a pathway, and in some ways there isn't really, and like we're trying to create that. When you look at when you look at sort of like the secular sector, like this is where they're so far ahead of us. Like the whole venture building world is part of the puzzle, and some people like to say, when I talk to them about what we do, they're like, "Oh, you're the Y Combinator for the church," and I'm like, "Yeah, in some sense, that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to create community, bring resources, so that people can work on things that will actually have breakthrough in terms of the challenges that the church is facing today."
Yeah. One of the things you mentioned as we were kind of starting our conversation is that churches tend to be slower in embracing innovation. And I'm curious just your thoughts a little bit of why is that? Why are we known for that at times? And how are you seeing that sort of hopefully change, or how can it change?
Yeah, I think when it comes to this particular part, I think people often have quite polarizing viewpoints on it. And I think we often conflate what the church is supposed to do with the kind of the idea of the local church, and then sort of the mission structures of the church. There's this theologian who was out of Fuller Seminary, he was very influential in kind of the modernist missions movement, called Ralph Winter, and he talked about this idea of modalities and sodalities. And I think we're trying to revisit that concept because it's kind of helpful in the sense that, in asking the question, what is the role of a local church, and is the role of a local church supposed to be innovative? And in a micro way, I think it is, because it needs to, from a missional point of view, engage and understand the needs of the community in which it's serving and reaching from a discipleship point of view. So in that way, you sort of micro innovation, it is important. It needs to be constantly relevant, for the sake of the gospel. But in many ways, churches are slow to change and adapt because it's about discipleship, and it's about formation, and it's, and I think a lot when we talk about spiritual gifts and gifting, we're in a moment where the sort of the teaching and the pastoral gifts are really celebrated, if you think about the APES model of leadership. But what is really under, really not what's what I'm looking for. There's not a ton of focus that are given to the apostolic leaders or the evangelists. Those are kind of taking a little bit of a back seat, unless it's kind of in the form of church planting, which is often, again, a pastoring kind of teaching gift. And because it's how do we fit those into traditional mission structures? So in some ways, I actually feel okay, the role of the local church is about helping people become more like Jesus in discipleship and growing so that they can live out empowered. But then and then on the other side of things, we still need the mission structures. Paul, when you think about church planting as a mission structure, Paul went about planting churches, local congregations, but there was a mission structure of, kind of a playbook, a way of planting these churches that kind of went first, that allowed the more settling kind of structures to come after. So I think so if that makes sense, it's just what are those meaningful missional structures that we can create so that the more settling things can come after to disciple people into the way of Jesus. And I think we sometimes just either pit one against the other, or we conflate the two. But I think it's helpful to think about the church in the greater sense of what all that could be. Yeah.
I think too at a local church level as well, there is, I think, some at times, and I don't say this in a negative way, because I know the weight of ministry, how much there is to do, the just all of that. But I think that there's not always space to kind of dream and to imagine and to sort of ask the question, even in the local context that you're ministering in, what can ministry look like here? Maybe apart from what we're doing right now, what is God's dream for this, for the next 5-10 years? And I guess a question I have, given that you spend probably a lot of time with dreamers and with people who can have some of that, is how can the church get better at that and making space for that?
Yeah, I think that there are some really helpful ways to explore it. Not that any of these are not difficult to do.
Yeah.
And the makeup of some churches and the actual gifting sometimes are both can create opportunities for these things to happen, or can create barriers. But I think when it comes to some meaningful things that the church could do, I think like on a macro level, like, what does it look like to create, set aside some resources to try new things. Also, churches start new ministries all the time, but like if they don't succeed once, then they like often just kill them, and like not helpfully like evaluate them. And then, with a lot of the ventures that we deal with, like we want to keep super tethered to the local church, so we don't want to be working with people who are just like solopreneurs kind of doing their own thing. We want them to be deeply committed to their local church. We want them to be mature leaders in their faith. And often, they will meet that, people take an idea to their pastor or their leadership and say, hey, I've got this really great idea. How can you help me think about it? Or what can I do about it? And they're like, great idea. God bless. I'll pray for you. Or this is not part of our 5-year strategic plan. Or, so like they almost get shut down before there's even a sense of, how do I take next steps? And this happens all the time because there are just so many things that are happening in the life of the church. And this could be as simple as, the church that I was part of helping plant in downtown Vancouver, we actually created a little fund. So it wasn't like a massive fund, but we ended up given some money from a church planting organization, and we basically called it the City. I forget the name. It was like the City Renewal Fund, and anybody in the church could apply for the fund. I think we had. I don't know, it was like 50 to 100K. I mean, it was a good pot of money. And we basically created a criteria, and anybody who wanted to start a project that was going to help bring renewal to Vancouver. Mm-hmm. And they had to partner with an existing kind of organization. So it wasn't just like, hey, this is my little hobby project, but it was like, we had to have some levels of accountability and that sort of thing. But, it was really interesting. I think like it was an amazing idea. And we had far fewer applications than I thought we actually would. I was like, oh my goodness, this is an amazing idea. Who wouldn't jump at the opportunity to get money to do the thing that they've always wanted to do? But the reality is that like, I think unless you are, and I think we made some progress in that area, but unless you have a culture of empowerment and giving people the ability to try, and also like it's like, okay, like if this fails, that's fine. Like let's do the due diligence.
Yeah.
But I think like creating resources, creating opportunities and times to experiment and fail. And this comes back to the whole idea of design thinking, of innovation, because that's like, baked into this idea of like, we have to try, we have to take risks, we can't be afraid to fail.
Yeah.
And that's almost like that's like not part of our vocabulary, because we're like, no, as like Christians, we should only do things, and like if it fails, then like God's obviously not in it, and and that's like, that can become like such a loaded thing where it's like, no, maybe you just didn't execute well in it, maybe you just didn't do the due diligence, maybe you didn't think through it, and like that's part of the venture building piece that there's a big focus on for us as Missional Labs as we help these missional ventures, is actually, how do you build ventures that like serve the missional goal so that you can be around in 5, 10, 15, 20 years plus.
Nice.
That is such like a whole different episode about when something doesn't work. We are so quick to put, I hesitate to say this, but like almost too much of a spiritual slant on it and like excuse it away or put it in this, you said it perfectly, God must not be in that. Or we just didn't do it right. Like, we would never do that in the corporate world, or in the secular world. But why do we do that immediately in the faith world? That's a really, I want to ask so many questions, but I'm going to shift a tiny bit. I really do not want to simplify this because there's not two buckets. But I think you mentioned just something earlier about discipleship.
Sure.
I think about the difference and the different types of churches, the different reasons why God has called them to a specific community. Some are very evangelistic. I don't want to say only or exclusively, but very evangelistic minded, helping people meet Jesus. And then some that are a little bit more discipleship minded. You said it, and I'm going to steal this, helping it to be more like Jesus. That is to me like the most beautiful explanation of what does discipleship mean. Just be more like Jesus. Talk about oversimplification. That's a really, I love that. But taking those two separate ideas, what are you seeing in churches that are using innovation and technology to be more discipleship minded?
Yeah, I think like there are so many opportunities to engage with technology for discipleship. I think the biggest challenge is around like digital distraction. And the fact is like, we come up with these great discipleship apps, but like your app is operating in an ecosystem where there are like 10 other apps,
Just 10?
Yeah. Just 10, and so I think like, I honestly think that there are meaningful ways to leverage that. I sometimes think like I'm already too old to really understand some of the newer trends and the ways that people like relate to to technology in that sense. But I think just back to your question, I'm not sure if you can like rephrase that in a different way, because I just lost my train of thought on that.
Maybe not technology, like to your point, like let's forget about technology, but being innovative. As backwards as that sounds, being innovative may not even require technology. So how are you seeing churches embrace innovation to build disciples?
Yes. So I think, I'll give you two examples from, two ventures that are currently in our cohort. The one is a girl who moved to New York to pursue a dream of acting on Broadway. She landed a lead role in Broadway. And then, within days of landing that, the pandemic happened and she found herself like, back home waiting for the pandemic to pass. And she felt like, she got there, she arrived there, she reached her dream. And then she was like, what the heck, God, like this is crazy. And she just felt God say to her, like, start discipling the woman that I've brought into, in proximity with. And obviously because of her role on Broadway, she started like amassing this social media following of thousands of young women from all over the world. And so she just decided to start discipling them. So she just started as, Zoom Bible study and that turned into this amazing venture called the Rise Collective, and which has become, this really amazing ministry, like engaging women from around the world. And she doesn't have a theology degree, she's never started something in her life before. She's super talented and like as amazing leadership gift. And she goes to an amazing, great church, but she's like probably pastoring, more people than a lot of like, the average probably church in Canada. We've got a lot of smaller churches in Canada, but, it's pretty incredible. And then, and as she's just followed God in that vision, she has a vision now to buy a townhome in New York and create a 1-year residential program for young women moving to New York so they could be formed in the ways of Jesus rather than in the ways of the world. And we're trying to help her think through that. What does that look like to raise a capital, to then build a model that can potentially be scaled to different cities, with a housing crisis in lots of part of the world, like escalating, cities being unaffordable, all these things. Like there's some really practical ways and some innovative ways to rethink through that. So that's one example. Another example. Yeah.
You said she doesn't have a theology degree, shouldn't go to seminary. She's not.
No.
I just wanted to hear that again, because we can really disqualify ourselves real fast.
Yeah, that's right. And I think like part of what we see happening, and like we're trying to creatively address this, is that often people are sent to seminary, but then they don't have like the practicalities of what it's like to like, build ventures. Or there's tons of stuff on leadership, so we get theology and there's like overwhelming amounts of stuff on leadership. But there's not a lot of stuff on like actual like venture building. How do you think about, what the thing is you build in, your key audience, your economic model, hiring the right team, all these things. And I think like we just have to look and understand what the ventures we work. So it's like, her challenge is like, she's got great leadership gift in. She's obviously got a product that has traction, or service that has traction in the world. People are resonating with her idea. How does she grow in her, theological abilities, or, outsource that, or bring that in, or collaborate with people? And so I think like, those, that's an example. There's another example of a, 23-year-old guy from Gold Coast in Australia. He's launched sort of multiple platforms, but he launched something called Bible.ai, and it's really amazing. Like within months of launching it, he had over 100,000 people from all around the world asking questions on the platform. Right. But it's not so much like that's a great discipleship tool within itself, but he's asking the question, like when the Bible Society goes into, areas and hands out Bibles in people's local languages, he's recognizing that a lot of them don't have discipleship resources in their language. Like 85% of the world doesn't speak English. So how can we use AI to translate some of the amazing discipleship resources that we have access to in the West into other places? Now, those are sort of like more macro kind of examples, and a lot of the projects we work with are a little bit more global. But I think like just on a local level, it's just, asking like, what are the needs of my community? Who else is doing it well in this area? And the other thing that I would say is like, we must not be afraid to collaborate. Mm-hmm. And often we compete against each other, which means that we duplicate resources. So it's like, this church wants to start this initiative, and then it's like, well, that church down the street has been doing that for like 5 years. And maybe you've got like an innovative spin on that, but it's like, hey, partner with them. And, so I think like that, innovation really in its simplest form is just like, either, creating something fresh and new, or taking something existing and, and giving it a new kind of a new layer of looking at things.
Yeah. Those are two really cool examples. And I think it gives people kind of a taste of some of what we've, have been talking about when it comes to innovation, when it comes to, just kind of being on the edge of pioneering, taking new ground. And so I love that. I do have just the last question before we get into our kind of rapid fire final five. But one thing, again, the whole goal of this podcast, conversations to empower healthy churches. So we always love to ask guests on our show, what, in your opinion, what's one essential component of a healthy church?
Yeah, I think one of the healthiest indicators for me is how a church prays and its prayer ministry, and I think so much of what we do flows from that place of intimacy with the Lord, and I think like both on an individual and a corporate level. And so I think like what does that look like? And I love I often think that churches who are innovating, who they're creating that space to like listen to the Lord, and they creating the space to intercede and hear, and let the Spirit impress upon their hearts like where the needs are, and it's really in that space. So I think like honestly, there's so much I could say, but like that's the one that sort of comes to mind. Yeah. I'm like show me the healthier church. Show me like the ways that your church engages in prayer, like your prayer rhythms. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Yeah, it totally does. And I
love that.
Yeah, I very well said. I agree. All right, we're gonna jump into our final five here. These will come at you quick. What is one book you'd recommend to church leaders?
I think the book that I'd recommend to church leaders is a book called Canoeing the Mountains by Todd Bolsinger. And it's a couple of years old now. I kind of read it, I think, just before the pandemic. But that book is really this book that it tells the story of Lewis and Clark and how they're moving across America to find the Pacific Ocean, and they literally encounter the Rockies. They think they're going to go down this river and like get to the Pacific Ocean, but they encounter the mountains. And the whole book's about like how do we adapt in a moment where like there is no map for what's coming ahead. And I just think that's like a beautiful metaphor for this moment that we're in. Like the world is literally changing and accelerating all the time. So that book gave me a lot of food for thought in terms of like the interdisciplinary nature of church leadership, of Christian leadership, and of adaptability, of resilience building, of seeing things differently when the territory around us is like just stuff that we're so unfamiliar with.
Yeah.
I love that book. It's so good. Yes. So, number 2, super fast. You have to be honest. What is the last thing that you listened to, like on Spotify or Apple or whatever?
Oh gosh. I think it was Gregory Alan Isaacoff.
Yeah.
If you've ever heard of him, he's an amazing artist. Yeah. I think his album with the Philadelphia Philharmonic Orchestra. Yeah. Really good.
Yeah.
Beautiful.
Chill music.
I'm a fan as well. What is your favorite piece of technology? And the only rule we give to this one is you can't see your phone, because it's a lot of people see your phone.
I actually I wear a Garmin watch, and I literally like never take it off, and I really love it. Just because I love to exercise, and I don't know. And it's just like, it's something that I use every single day. It tracks my workouts, and it gives you lots of good information. So it's really cool. Love it.
You need it up there in those mountains and all the things. That's perfect. That's a very logical answer. All right. Is there a quote or a piece of wisdom that has just really stuck with you throughout the years?
You know what? I think that it's not so much a quote, as it's more, I think more just a posture of constantly just praying that God would give me wisdom and humility in terms of all things. I think like wisdom is generally like a really great prayer that I often pray for leaders, because we like need it so much, in like our day and age. So I would say that, and maybe, like just as I think about it, the one that does actually come to mind is a quote by Saint Ignatius of Loyola, and he says, the glory of God is a man that's fully alive. And that sense of like when we are doing the things that we are created to do, like when we live in alignment with who God's created to do, when we live into our redemptive potential, like there is the sense that we really are fully alive, and that's what brings God like the most glory. So that's kind of like a little bit of a North Star for me. Is like, am I feeling fully alive in what I'm doing? And like that's the posture of like, hey, I think when I am, this actually brings God the most glory.
I just wrote down redemptive potential. I'm going to tell myself every day, I've got redemptive potential.
Yeah,
Stephen said,
you do.
I love that. That's really good.
It's like the who you becoming,
I like that
part.
All right, last one. One thing that you'd like to communicate to our audience of church leaders.
Yeah, I think the thing that I would say is that don't despise the day of small beginnings. And I really think like we're in a moment where we're going to need each other more than we ever could imagine. And so I think like we need to champion each other, even if we're like, that's a crazy idea. Like, why would you ever do that? It's like, no, that's a crazy idea, but go for it.
Yeah.
Why would we not?
And I think that people who come to you with ideas, like I think we all know and understand that like some people come to us with ideas. It's just like, maybe that's not going to fly. But I would just say like, can you create more opportunities for people to try new things, to experiment, to explore? So the sort of the way that I would think about it is like, what does it look like for us to enter into a time of exploration? What does it look like for you as a church to enter a time of exploration? And like exploration is open-ended, like it's not so much about goals and this and that. It's like, it's exploring. Like, is this way going to work? Is that way going to work? So that's what I'd say to you. Don't embrace the adventure, the risk taking, the courage of what comes with exploration.
Yeah. Well, that's a needed encouragement, and I appreciate that very much. Can you give people just an idea where they can find out more about Missional Labs, what you all are doing, maybe connect with you?
Yeah, you can check out missionallabs.co. I think like we sort of skirted around some of the specifics, but the main thing that we run at Missional Labs is a 9-month accelerator program. We take 12 to 15 ventures from all over the world. And essentially we do a hybrid program. We have in-person meetups in New York, in Oxford, London, and San Francisco. And we basically take them through a curriculum of missional theology, leadership formation, and then venture build them. And we surround them with some of the best mentors in the world, and we try to provide them with funding connections to help build capacity, and we platform their ideas by helping them pitch in some of these global audiences. So our next application cycle is opens in March for September. And so, yeah, you can find out there. You can, if you have a venture that you want to submit, there's a place on our website if you want to get in touch with us and to see some of the different things that we offer. Like, that's our main program. We do a couple of other things as well. But check out Missional Labs, and that's the best way to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, we'll make sure to link to that in the show notes so that people can get there easily. But just so appreciate your time today, sharing with us, encouraging, challenging us, and really lending your voice to, help church leaders continue to think, dream, embrace innovation. And we so appreciate that from you. And and certainly appreciate those of you listening, watching today. We hope this conversation has been helpful. If it has, we'd love for you to share it, whether that's sending a link to somebody or liking, subscribing, leaving a review. All those things help us get conversations into more church leaders' ears. And so we'd appreciate that. We're grateful for your time today, and we'll see you next time.
This episode of the Church Leadership Lab podcast is brought to you by Ministry Brands, the largest provider of church technology software. Over 90,000 churches rely on Ministry Brands for their single platform solution that brings together all the digital tools a church needs. From online giving to websites to church management software and more, Ministry Brands is leading the way in simple to use, innovative solutions, all with the goal of empowering healthy churches. To learn more, visit ministrybrands.com.